All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your biology class for today. And we're going to talk about or give a general idea of what photosynthesis is. A little bit later on, we might go into some of the details regarding photosynthesis and some of the processes. But for today, we're just going to have a little bit of an overview and we're going to mention or discuss a couple of key concepts. So let me go ahead and set my whiteboard and let's get started. So today's topic, as I mentioned, an overview of photosynthesis. And I'm going to read a little bit from your book and pretty much just write down the most important concepts. It says some organisms are called producers. Well, let's just get down to the nitty gritty, really. So we have different types of organisms, and some organisms are producers. And of course, a producer is an organism that makes their own energy or food source. So, for example, plants are an example of producers because plants don't need to obtain their energy from an external source. We know that plants are photosynthetic organisms, and because they're photosynthetic organisms, they um they basically make their own food. But plants are not the only organisms that are producers. We also have um, certain bacteria where the organisms are producers. And some bacteria are actually photosynthetic. Okay, so let me once again clarify that for you guys, just in case someone is having any difficulty understanding me. Real quick, we have organisms that are producers, um, and basically organisms that are producers, like the word suggests, produce their own food. Examples of these are plants and some bacteria. So, examples of this are plants and bacteria, along with some protists, which are simple organisms. We'll talk about those a little bit later on in the course, hopefully. Um, the main source of chemical energy for most organisms on Earth. Okay, so it says producers are the main source of energy for many organisms on Earth. So, producers are source of energy for many organisms on Earth. Okay, so this is what we mean. Um, in one way, in some way, shape, or form, all organisms obtain energy from producers. An example of this is we have animals that are herbivores or animals that eat plants, and we have a wolf that eats one of these animals. For example, we have a rabbit who's a herbivore, and that rabbit is eaten by a wolf. Because the rabbit's diet is plant based or it's a herbivore, that means that some of the energy or some of the nutrients that the wolf obtains by eating the rabbit actually comes from the fact that the rabbit eats plants. So that's how in one way or another, most organisms actually obtain indirectly their energy from producers. Of course, we have again organisms that are producers that make um, their own food source. Okay, so let's talk real quick then about what photosynthesis is. So recapping real quick, we know that we have organisms that are producers and of course, consumers. Although I didn't write it there, but we know what consumers are. Producers, for example, are some plants, bacteria, some protists, and they produce their own energy. Plants, for example, turns light energy into chemical energy. We're going to talk about that in a minute. We have some bacteria that are also photosynthetic, and of course, we talked about in the previous video about chemiosynthesis and chemiosynthetic organisms. Um, Producers are um, producers are the main or can be the main source of energy, of chemical energy for most organisms on earth. Again, we go to the example: a rabbit eats grass, a wolf eats a rabbit. A wolf obtains certain nutrients from the rabbit because the rabbit ate plants. And it sounds all Lion Kingy, but it's the secret, it's the circle of life, right? Basically, we're all interconnected. And of course, now we're going to go into photosynthesis, or at least the overview of photosynthesis. So the first thing I'm going to do is define photosynthesis. Okay, so I'm going to define photosynthesis according to your textbook. So reading from your textbooks, we can say that photosynthesis is the process that captures energy. Photosynthesis is the process that captures energy from sunlight to make sugars. To make sugars that store chemical energy. So, let's see if I can illustrate what this means. We have a plant. You know what? Let's try this. I haven't done this in a while. We have a rose. And that rose is a plant, or has a plant. It's a flower, right? You look at me with my kindergarten drawings. And we have the rose has a stem, and it has its leaves. And isn't this pretty, right? You're probably not laughing while you're listening to this. But just in case, if you are laughing, no, never mind. Okay, so, and we have Mr. Sun, and what he does is he provides UV rays. And the plant right here, the leaves, absorb those UV rays, and photosynthesis occurs. And of course, this is a very rough and general explanation. And what happens is that at a cellular level, we already know that plant cells use ATP, which is actually what stores energy inside of the plant. All right, so that's very, 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 very broad how photosynthesis works. Okay, so basically, sunlight hits the plants, the leaves absorb the sunlight, they turn that through a bunch of chemical reactions that we're going to talk about in just a minute, and they go ahead and they turn that into ATP, which we know is the molecule that stores energy in living organisms' cells. Okay, so now getting back to what the book says, and I read from your book. It says, therefore, directly or indirectly, the energy for almost all organisms begins with sunlight. So that's good to know. Sunlight, directly or indirectly, is responsible for organisms to obtain energy. Directly or indirectly is the source of energy for almost all organisms. For almost all organisms, okay? Of course, we know that photosynthesis occurs in plants, and plants absorb visible sunlight for photosynthesis. And let me explain that. Plants absorb visible sunlight for photosynthesis. So when we look at the sun, and let me try to illustrate that with my bad drawings again. I know a lot of you love my drawings and know that I have an artistic talent. Let me do that. Let me just realize that. Let me type that again because for some reason I changed the text to yellow and that was not what I was supposed to do. Let me reread that so I can type it again. I apologize for that. It says plants absorb visible light for photosynthesis. Visible light appears white but is made up of several different colors. So plants absorb visible light for photosynthesis. For photosynthesis. Now let me explain that again with my cheesy drawings. And I know you guys love my drawings. Can't stretch that enough. We have the sunlight, the sun. Wait, that is not the color I want. Let's try that again. We have the sun. And the sun, we see it as yellow. But the reality is that that is not the color of the sun itself. The sun actually has various different colors. So plants absorb the sunlight that is visible because the sun emits other different types of energy. The sun actually, you know what? Let me erase that. Let me try it again. That just does not look nice. So let's try that again. So we have our sun, or at least what we can perceive from the sun. And the sun, we see it, or our eyes perceive the sunlight as yellow or orange if we're looking at a sunset or a sunrise. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is not the case. You know what? Let me just go ahead and erase this. I will get this sun drawn right. I guarantee that. Let's see if I can do it now. The sun, there you go. The sun is not really yellow. In fact, there's actually parts of the sun where it's hottest that actually has kind of like blue colors. It's like a fire. When you look at a fire, the hottest part of the fire is not the external part, although it can burn you pretty bad. It's actually when you turn on a stove or a match, you see that little blue light. That's actually the hottest part of the fire, and it's actually the hottest part of the sun too. So we see the sun as yellow, but the reality is that the sun does not emit yellow light. That's just what our eyes can see. So when we're looking at the sun and we're seeing yellow, and as I draw my sun, I explain that it's not that the sun has a yellow coloring. It's just that's the color that our eyes can perceive when we look at the sun. So plants absorb the visible light of the sun. There are other types of energy and rays that the sun emits, like UV rays and all these other things, but it is not what plants use to undergo photosynthesis. So let's talk about another structure that is found in plants that is also very useful for photosynthesis. We're going to talk about chlorophyll. Now, chlorophyll is a molecule in the chloroplasts that absorbs some of the energy in visible lights. So basically, there you go. Basically, um, chlorophyll absorbs the visible sunlight or some visible sunlight, some of the energy in the visible sunlight. Okay, chlorophyll absorbs some of the energy in the visible sunlight. Absorb some of the energy in the visible sunlight. Okay, and it says that plants have two main types of chlorophyll: chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Plants have two types of chlorophyll: A and B. Okay, so plants have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Okay, and they're both used in photosynthesis, and each one has a specific function. It says that says together the two types of chlorophyll absorb mostly red and blue wavelength. And again, the red and blue wavelength are have a lot of energy. So the two types of chlorophyll absorb red and blue wavelengths. Okay. Okay. Plants have other light absorbing molecules that absorb green light. Okay. So that's good to understand. That's good to know. To point out. I'm sorry. Plants have other molecules that absorb the green sunlight. I mean, absorb green wavelength. I'm sorry, sunlight. So let me go ahead and clear this real quick, and then we'll continue on with what we were doing. So chlorophyll has chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B. They absorb red and blue, and then there are other molecules that absorb the green wavelength, right? Um, the green color of plants comes from the reflection of light's green wavelength. Okay, so a plant's green color, and that's a very interesting fact. We think that the plant is green because it absorbs light, but it's the opposite. A plant's Green color green color is the reflection of the light's green wavelength. Is a reflection of the light's green wavelengths wavelengths by chlorophyll. So chlorophyll A and B basically absorb red and blue light, and then the green light is pretty much a reflection of um, the green light that the very few green light that is absorbed by the chloroplasts. It says a plant's green color is a reflection of the light's green wavelengths by chlorophyll. There you go. And now we're going to continue and talk about another important structures that plants have in order to undergo photosynthesis, and they are called the thylakoids. It says chloroplasts are the membrane-bound organelles where photosynthesis takes place in plants. So, photosynthesis takes place, or photosynthesis in plants, because there are other organisms that can undergo photosynthesis. Photosynthesis in plants takes place in the chloroplasts, okay, which are membrane-bound organelles. Membrane-bound organelles. It says when photosynthesis, it says most of the chloroplasts are in the leaf. So that's also important to know. Most of the chloroplasts are found in the leaves. Remember when I drew that, made that little drawing a minute ago, talking about like the photosynthesis and how the sunlight hits the leaves? Well, it's because the chloroplasts are there. Okay. Um, it says the two main parts of chloroplast needed for photosynthesis are the grana and the stroma. The main parts, the two main parts of chloroplast needed for photosynthesis are the grana and the stroma. So those are the two structures that are needed in the chloroplast in order to undergo photosynthesis. And again, the chloroplasts are in the are located mainly in the leaves, although that's not the only place where they are. And that the two structures are the grana and the stroma. The grana are stacks of coin-shaped membrane-bound. Excuse me, grana. Let me write that down. The grana, before I forget what I was reading, and that way I can explain it to you guys better. So basically, the grana um, are stacks coin shaped, membrane enclosed. I'm sorry, membrane enclosed. Membrane enclosed compartments called thylakoids. Called thylakoids. So the grana are pretty much stacks of coins, and I'm going to try to draw that in a minute so you guys understand. Um, and the thylakoid, it says the membranes of the thylakoid contains chlorophyll and other light absorbing. So basically, this is in the chloroplast. Chloroplasts are in the leaf, and um, there's they have the coin shaped structure called thylakoids. Thylakoids. And the membranes of the thylakoids contain chlorophyll. So the membranes of the thylakoids contain chlorophyll and other light absorbing molecules. I'm sorry. So just so you guys have an idea, this specifically, the grana, which contains the structures, you have to look at it like this. So they're pretty much little discs that are kind of stacked on top of each other, and these are found. This is absorbing it in the very molecular level at the leaf, so inside the leaf. And these thylakoids, which are part of the grana, which is very important in photosynthesis, contain chlorophyll. And remember that the chlorophyll absorbs the blue and red light, and actually reflects the very little green light it absorbs. So that's what you kind of see inside of the leaf of the plant specifically, and that's what they do. It says the stroma is the fluid that surrounds the grana inside of the chloroplast. So the stroma, let me see if I can write that. See if I move this a little bit and I can write it down here. The stroma is the fluid that surrounds the grana. Surrounds the grana inside of the inside of a chloroplast. Inside of the chloroplast. So there are two phases in photosynthesis, and hopefully we'll discuss them very quickly. There is the light dependent phase and the light independent phase. If you've ever asked yourself, if a plant needs sunlight in order to survive, then how does it stay alive when the sun is out? And that's because photosynthesis itself has two phases: the dependent phase and the independent, or the light dependent phase and the light independent phase. And we're going to talk about them in just a minute. and we're going to go over some of the other concepts of the light dependent and the light independent phase. So let me get myself organized here, and that way we can start discussing that. And I'm going to summarize this as best as I can specifically. And we're just going to talk about the two main points of the light dependent and independent phase, and that should be the end of this video, right? So let's talk about these phases. Again, there has to be, or it makes sense that there are two different phases of photosynthesis, because one phase is that which occurs in the presence of light, and the other phase is that which occurs in the absence of light. So let me go ahead and clear the drawings real quick. And let's start. So let's talk about the light independent reaction. And the light independent reaction says captures energy from the sunlight. So captures energy from the sunlight. Captures energy from the sunlight. It says these reactions take place within and across the membrane of the thylakoid, and it says water is needed. So takes place in the membranes of the thylakoids, which we said are the grana, which are found in the leaves. Takes place in the membrane of the thylakoids. Within and across the membrane of the thylakoids. Within and across. So let me fix that. Within and across the membrane of the thylakoids. Also, water and sunlight are needed. Water and sunlight are needed. So let's summarize them real quick. So we're talking about the light independent reaction. It says it captures energy from the sunlight. It takes place within and across the membranes of the thylakoids, and water and sunlight are needed. So let's talk about the steps. There are a lot of steps in photosynthesis. However, we're going to give you an overview, and we're only going to do maybe very generally step 1 and step 2. So step 1 is chlorophyll absorbs energy from the sunlight. So the chlorophyll absorbs energy from the sunlight, as the energy is transferred along the thylakoid membrane. Energy is transferred across the thylakoid membrane. It says water is broken down into oxygen and released. So water is broken down into oxygen and released. So basically, the chloroplast or chlorophyll, excuse me, absorbs the energy. It's transferred across to the thylakoids, and then water is broken down into oxygen. So this is why plants need water, because it's important for them to, in order for them to undergo photosynthesis, more specifically the light dependent phase. Okay, the light dependent phase. I realize I wrote light independent, and this is actually the light dependent. So let me fix that typo here. Um, that is an error. I just realized that now. This is not the light independent phase. Right here, it's supposed to say light dependent. So let me just kind of. Actually, let's see if I can do this. And there you go. I made a mistake there, ladies and gentlemen. It is not the light deep independent phase that we're talking about. It is the light dependent phase. So I apologize for that mistake. I apologize for that. And it says the light dependent reaction captures energy from the sunlight. It takes place within and across the membrane of the thylakoids. Water and sunlight are needed. It says chlorophyll. The first step is that chlorophyll absorbs. Um, well, sorry about that. Chlorophyll absorbs. Give me 1 second, guys. I apologize for today's mess of errors. So, wait a minute. So, as I fix this error, chlorophyll absorbs the energy from the sunlight. Okay, and then when it does, is that the energy is transferred across the thylakoid membrane, and then water is basically broken down into oxygen and um, is broken down to oxygen. So that means that that produces oxygen. And of course, you all know that oxygen is very important because we need it to survive, and plants are very, and oxygen is one of the byproducts of photosynthesis. So that's basically the first step of the light dependent phase. The second step says that energy carried along the thylakoid membrane, energy carried across the thylakoid membrane is transferred is transferred to molecules that carry energy, is transferred into molecules that store energy, or that carry energy. I'm sorry. Such as ATP. All right. So we're going to talk about the second. This is the second step of the light dependent phase. And again, the second step is that once water is broken down into oxygen, then it goes across the thylakoid membrane, and that turns into ATP pretty much. So this is a very complex process, a very detailed process that hopefully we'll get the chance to see in a couple of more videos. But basically, that's just a summary of the first phase. And now we said that there's a light dependent and the light independent phase. So let's talk about the light independent phase. And I believe that would be after this, that would be it for this video lesson. If you guys okay, so let's talk about the light independent reactions or the light independent phase. the light independent reaction as uses energy from the light dependent reaction. So the energy that is made in the light dependent reaction is used here. In the light independent reaction. It says energy from the light dependent reaction to make sugars. Sugars. It says that these reactions occur in the stroma of the chloroplast, so that's good to know, or that's important. I mean, stroma of the um occurring the stroma. Excuse me for a minute. Of the chloroplasts. And carbon dioxide is needed in this phase. So see how the grana, which is also in the chloroplast, are what absorbs the light energy for the light dependent phase, but then the stroma plays an important part in the light independent phase or the light independent reaction. So let's look at the first again, very, very much summarizing this, and this would be the last two important points of this. And let's talk about this real quick. So in the light independent phase, it says carbon dioxide is added to a cycle of chemical reactions. So carbon dioxide is added to a carbon dioxide is added to a cycle of chemical reactions to build larger molecules to build larger molecules excuse me, I was reading wrong. Build larger molecules. And this is, of course, in the light independent phase, and that would be the first step in the light independent phase. Let's um, let's actually. There you go. That looks better. CO2. Okay. Let's look at the second step. So basically, in the first step, it says that carbon dioxide is added to a cycle of chemical reactions to build larger molecules. And then it says that energy from the light dependent reactions is used in these reactions, and we already established that. And then after that, it says a molecule of simple sugar is formed. So after that, a molecule of single sugar is formed. It says the sugar, usually glucose, stores some of the energy that was captured from sunlight. So this sugar So this sugar stores some of the energy that was captured from the sunlight. By the sunlight. Okay, so let's summarize this real quick, and then that's pretty much it for this video lesson. So we have two phases of photosynthesis: the light dependent reactions and the light independent reaction. Pretty much in the light independent reaction, it says that the chlorophyll absorbs the energy from the sunlight, and that energy is transferred across the thylakoid, which we mentioned. And it says that water molecules are broken down and oxygen is released. After that happens, it says that energy carried along the thylakoid membrane is transferred to the molecules to carry energy such as ATP. So basically, chloroplasts absorb the sunlight turns water into oxygen, and then energy is transferred into ATP, right? Which is what the cell uses. Then we go into the light independent phase. And in the light independent phase, carbon dioxide is needed. In fact, that carbon dioxide is added to a cycle of chemical reactions to build larger molecules. It says the energy from, and also in the light independent phase, they use the energy absorbed from the light dependent phase. Now, these large molecules are formed or are then transferred into simple sugars, and that sugar stores some of the energy in the sunlight. So here's another way in which we indirectly benefit from it, um, or how sunlight is actually beneficial indirectly in our cases, if for the vegetables that we consume and all these things. um, so then what is formed in photosynthesis? And I'm going to summarize this with the chemical reaction, and then that would be it for this video, guys. So basically, what we're having, or chemically speaking, what's happening is that we have six carbon dioxide molecules. And this is, of course, the reaction for the light independent phase. So from the light dependent phase or reactions, we get six carbon dioxide molecules, right? Those six carbon dioxide molecules are added to six water molecules. And we have the light enzymes. We'll say light energy. So we'll just say light energy or light enzymes. And then we have a sugar, which is glucose mainly, carbon 6, H12O6. O6. Oh, wow. There you go. O6 plus 6 oxygen molecules. Okay. So what we saw there is the chemical equation for the whole photosynthesis. So photosynthesis takes water, carbon dioxide, and light and converts it into sugar and oxygen. And of course, the oxygen is what we breathe. So this has been a very, very brief, or as brief as I could possibly make it, explanation and overview of photosynthesis, guys. Hopefully this video will help you out. If you have Any questions, you know where to find me. So stay safe, and we'll see each other in our next class. Bye.